Okay, I'm going to ask that the picture taking wraps up so we can resume. Yes. Okay. I will. Thanks. Last picture. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nakia Gooding. I am a remote sensing research officer at the Institute of Marine Affairs here in Trinidad and Tobago. Given a second for persons to find their seats. So before we get into the session, I will be introducing the session, its themes, as well as the speakers. And I'm asking that speakers, when after I introduce you and you've made your presentation, you have a seat and sit down for the panel. So this session focuses on harmonizing the MRV across the Latin American and Caribbean region, not just as a technical exercise, but as a prerequisite for credibility, comparability, and ultimately decision-making. Across the LAC region, we're seeing incredible innovation in blue carbon science, new tools, new data streams, and new methodologies. But as many of you know, the innovation only delivers impact when it can be integrated, standardized, and trusted. A lot of threes here. Today's speakers will take us from cutting-edge geospatial systems, ground truthing biomass estimates, methane measurements, and the last speaker will speak on the real-world challenge of embedding new science into established MRV frameworks. So to get us started, I'd like to invite Dr. Michelle Kalamandeen. You could go ahead and make your way up. Dr. Kalamandeen is the geospatial lead for nature-based solutions at Unique Land Use, GmbH. And she is a conservation and geospatial scientist with over 15 years of experience working at the intersection of Earth observation, biodiversity strategy, climate policy, and inclusive governance across the Latin American and Caribbean region, the Amazon basin, Africa, Europe, and North America. Her work focuses on translating complex environmental data into decisions that are actionable under real-world constraints. Michelle brings deep technical expertise in geospatial analytics, MRV systems, biodiversity and carbon frameworks, alongside extensive experience in protected area establishment, ecosystem restoration, and indigenous-led conservation. She has advised governments, international finance institutions, multilaterals, and the private sector on designing systems that balance scientific rigor with urgency, uncertainty, and community realities. Currently leading the geospatial strategy and innovation within a multidisciplinary environment, Michelle is known for integrating data, governance, and people-centered processes to enable credible delivery-ready climate and nature solutions at scale. Today, she will be presenting on MRV to decisions, designing blue carbon systems that enable action. Please put your hands together to welcome her.
Sorry. Hi, everyone. I'd like to just say thank you first and foremost to UWI Stacy and IDB for inviting me, and as well as my partner here, Coastal Dynamic Limited, for the opportunity to speak with you. Can you put up the slide? Thanks. If blue carbon were a research problem, we'd probably be done by now. In the Caribbean and Latin America, demand is very strong, science is very solid, and the interest is very real. What's stalling progress isn't measurement, it's that our system doesn't help people make decisions when reality refuses to behave like our models. And that gap between knowing and deciding is what I'd like to talk about today. Next slide, please. So in Latin America, climate risk isn't something we're preparing for someday. It's actually here. People are already living it. Coastal exposure is concentrated and growing, while the ability to respond tends to vary widely within countries as well as between. What's often missed is that many communities, especially indigenous and local communities, they aren't waiting for reports. They're already making real decisions about land, livelihoods, and risk long before even MRV cycles are complete. So adaptation here isn't about future challenge, it's an operational one. And that's where the tensions tend to start, because while decisions are already being made on the ground, our systems are designed to move much, much slower. So blue carbon, next slide, please. We see it very clearly that's in demand. We've heard a lot of speakers yesterday and today sort of talked about the science, even the financing that tends to go with it. So where projects tends to stall, it's not because people aren't interested. What we see instead, that there's a delivery problem. Growth estimates, for example, are often assumed stable conditions. That simply doesn't exist on the coast. Exposures to wave, erosions, or degradations tend to be underestimated. We've seen this in practice globally, especially in the regions that we tend to be working in Latin America and in the Caribbean. We also see this in some of our projects in Indonesia, Senegal, as well as in India. So exposure to waves, as I mentioned, they're currently very underestimated. And when those assumptions tend to break down, cost tends to rise very quickly. At the same time, many projects are simply too small to attract investment. From practice, what we've seen is anything between around 200 hectares to 350 hectares can be meaningful and manageable by NGOs, but for investors, it's too small to justify transactional costs. So projects don't tend to fail on integrity here. They tend to stall because the system can't move from interest to decisions. And that brings us to the real bottleneck. Next slide, please. So most blue carbon systems are very clear about what needs to be measured and reported. What we're much less clear about is how decisions are actually made. And I think this was touched on by the panel yesterday with Raquel and Gerard. So what we have here is questions about who decides when conditions change, what signals are enough to adjust, and how much uncertainty is acceptable before any action is taken. In practice, this means teams probably see very early on rising costs, risk exposure, governance constraints, but aren't authorized to act until formal cycle tends to close. The bottleneck isn't data. I don't think we have a data problem. It's more about how and when decisions are allowed to happen. So what does decision look like on the ground? Next slide, please. So on the ground, decisions don't happen at the end. They tend to occur very continuously. Teams are constantly choosing where to restore, when to pause, and whether a project can realistically scale. But most systems tend to only recognize decisions at the end of the process. And this often occurs when options are already very limited. This is why MRV, I think, needs to play a different or maybe an additional role in this process. Next slide. So on the coast, things don't stay still for very long, enough for even neat reporting cycles. So storm changes baselines, erosion shifts. The shoreline conditions look very different from year to year, or even from month to month. People working on the ground usually sees this changes early, but the system often tells them to wait. Designing MRVs as a learning system means we don't wait for confirmation after the fact. We adjust early while choices still matter. That's not about lowering standards in this regard or even scientific rigor. It's about making good information leading to timely decision. To do that well, we need some tool, and I would be very remiss as a remote sensing scientist if I don't bring up geospatial tools. Next slide. So these tend to be more helpful when they tend to tell us when to stop putting money in the wrong places. They help us where exposure, degradation, or even competing land use drive cost up later after we've even committed to it. That lets team know at different futures together. So for example, disasters, carbon outcome, even livelihoods. and focus on actions that make sense no matter what. The goal here isn't to get more maps. It's really to help inform decisions and making fewer bad decisions. So a lot of you may not know Unique Land Use. It's a company that's based in Germany, but we have offices around the world. So, for example, in Paraguay or in Vietnam. I operate out of Toronto at the moment. And we have over 80 to 100 persons working for us. There's 4 departments. We have our climate department, our forestry, our agriculture and rural development, and my department, which is the digital solutions. Within that, we have 2 teams, geospatial solutions, as well as MIS, management for information systems. And so this is where we're using a lot of us are remote sensing scientists, data specialists, data analysts. And we're actually using some of the tools that was mentioned yesterday, so embedded systems, to actually develop our own biomass models, and especially soil carbon models here as well, using AI and things like neural network and so forth. So even then, when you have all this data, data doesn't decide, people tend to do that. Next slide. So across the region, there's lots of indigenous and local communities are already managing ecosystems. A good example here is, this is a picture from Guyana with the Raraos that we work with. They're actually living in mangrove ecosystems. So in some contexts, successful restoration can easily increase land insecurity, and I think that was mentioned that this was covered at your last conference about land rights and so forth, and we see that every day. When protection status changes, people risk losing access, so they respond accordingly. So, a good example we've seen on the ground, farmers tend to cut mangroves when restoration tends to threaten land access or even profitability. That's why governance cannot be an afterthought. It has to be within the design input. So you have things like when you combine MRV, geospatial insight, and even governance, the system actually starts to work a bit better. Next. This integration tends to lead to very practical outcomes. So you have faster investment decision, clearer trade-offs, there's lower risk for failure, and even stronger legitimacy. In other words, it's how small, even high-integrity projects stop being pilots and actually start becoming investment portfolio. And I think some of the speakers yesterday touched on ensuring you have nested or even jurisdictional groupings occurring. This isn't about scaling hectares, it's actually about scaling confidence, and that's where I think there needs to be a parallel decision-making framework alongside MRV. So what needs to change upstream to make this profitable? Next slide. It's actually pretty practical. First, projects need permission to adjust when condition changes instead of being locked into assumptions that no longer hold. Secondly, MRV needs to be funded not just to prove results at the end, but to help teams learn and adapt along the way, especially since we're constantly dealing with disasters and changes along our coastlines. And thirdly, governance and FPIC, free, prior, and informed consent, needs real time and resources because they're underfunded, and if they aren't represented at the beginning, they tend to slow everything down. MRV tends to be the last sort of objective of the process. You have pre-feasibility, eligibility, due diligence, risk assessment, performance benchmark. All of these processes tend to occur even before you start hitting MRV for your carbon credits. So none of this tends to lower integrity. It just helps to reduce risk. So what does that look like in practice? This is a decision sort of tree that we have when you can bring 3 things together. So you think about what data and maps are telling us, what information is there already, what is the monitoring showing us, what communities are seeing on the ground. And instead of waiting for years, teams check in at regular moments, every few months, or even right after a major disaster. And thirdly, it's clear in advance who is allowed to make decisions. We saw that coming out yesterday's panel. So projects don't get stuck sort of waiting for approvals. And finally, everyone tends to agree ahead of time what the signals are for adjusting, pausing, or even keep going. That's how projects stop kind of waiting and starts moving as well. So blue carbon, we see that the science is working, it's solid, and the momentum tends to be very real. What isn't keeping up is how our systems deal with reality on the ground. In dynamic coastal regions like ours, waiting for perfect certainty doesn't actually reduce risk, it increases it. The coast is very good at reminding us that reality tends to move very fast than paperwork. So if we design for learning, clear decisions, and even trust, we can turn that momentum into a real outcome here. And that's it. Thank you. Great. Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I think we all appreciate the connections made from interest to action, where decision lies in it, and the reframing of MRVs as a learning and decision-based system. So from system-level design, we now move into the accuracy of data that underpins those systems, specifically in mangrove biomass estimation. So I'm now going to welcome our second speaker, Dr. Tobias Jackson, a senior research associate at the University of Bristol in the UK, who's going to make a presentation on assessing the accuracy of mangrove allometric equations using terrestrial laser scanning data. So Dr. Jackson is a senior research associate. As I mentioned, he focuses on remote sensing of forests. His background is in physics, and he switched to forest ecology for his PhD. During the time, he measured and modeled the risk of wind damage in broadleaf forests. This work introduced him to terrestrial laser scanning, which maps the 3D architecture of trees in amazing detail. Tobias then continued working with laser scanning data through a postdoc in Cambridge, mapping disturbance in tropical forests at the landscape scale. His current work uses terrestrial and airborne laser scanning to monitor growth and mortality processes across tropical landscapes. He is specifically focusing on forests that have been actively restored in order to assess how these interventions may impact forest structure over time, as well as the inclusion and adaptation of using machine learning methods to segment trees so that we could track individual trees over time. Please welcome Dr. Jackson. Here's the clicker.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Nakia. Switching from physics to forest ecology was a good idea. It's much nicer. So my role on this project is as a consultant looking at the allometric equations to predict biomass. And we've heard a lot about this, but I'm just going to start from the basics and say, what is an allometric equation? So we want to measure how much carbon is stored in forests. And when we go to forests, we measure the diameter of the trunk on these trees, and we measure the height, and we note down the species. That's the information we have from the field data. And we want to get to plot-level carbon estimates. And so an allometric equation is just what we use to transform from these variables to the plot-level carbon. And it's quite simple. So we have 4 countries in this project: Suriname, Colombia, Panama, and Jamaica, and we have lots of data from all of these places, lots of plot data here. And I just put all of that data into one of the allometric equations that Charles Price presented yesterday. So the equation's down there on the bottom, and we basically transform from trunk diameter to biomass. And that's great. But the problem we have is that there are lots of allometric equations available, and we don't know which one's best. So if I do that with 2 other ones, we get very different answers. So in the middle here, I've used a local equation, and you see that in Suriname, the biomass goes up quite substantially, same in Colombia. And then the third one is a kind of a pan-tropical equation from Charvetal, and it goes up again, essentially. And the truth is, there are dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of these allometric equations available. Okay. And as Charles Price mentioned yesterday, I think the key problem for allometric equations at the moment is that they are based on lots of small trees, but the biomass in forests is mostly stored in the big trees. And you saw in some of his pictures how much effort it is to cut down and weigh these trees. That's what we need. That's the true validation data for these equations. But it's a lot of effort. And so if I say what I need is you to cut down 100 really big trees and weigh them, and then you can make a good one, I'm going to be waiting decades. Right? That's not going to happen. It's illegal in most places. So what we're trying to do is use terrestrial laser scanning to bridge this difficulty. And so, again, you've heard a fair amount about this. This is a TLS scanner in a forest collecting data, and you get nice, pretty pictures like this. This is a picture for some data that Jasper collected in Suriname. Beautiful 3D structure. And we take that data, and we build these cylinder models of trees. So the cylinder model, if you zoom in, it looks like this. That we reconstruct the tree from a number of cylinders. And so we can get lots of detail. And we add up the volume of all these cylinders and get the total woody volume of the tree. And obviously, we know for these species, we usually know the wood density. So volume times density is mass, biomass. So we're using terrestrial laser scanning data in this way to estimate the biomass of these trees. This has been done in some forests around the world. So this is really the classic paper on that by Kim Calders, looking at eucalypts in Australia and showing that there's a good correlation between. So he did the scanning, and then he actually cut down the trees and checked, as some people were showing us as well. Whenever that happens, when you manage to scan them and cut them down, it gets even more valuable, but as you say, difficult. So this is the classic paper on that. There's other papers out there in tropical forests, in conifer plantations, generally showing it works well. And this is what we have in this project. And I'm going to pause here for a second and say, getting this amount of data on a screen has taken a huge amount of work from lots of people here. So firstly, many people have been out in the field collecting this TLS data, and it's really difficult. Some of these trees, we scan them from 40 or 50 different positions for a single tree, and we merge all these scans together. We have huge, really big data files for a single tree, and then people here have spent a long time cleaning this data. So thank you very much for everyone who's contributed to that. I know it's many, many weeks of work for different people to get here. Exactly. And thank you to Farah for organizing all of the whole thing. And I want to acknowledge as well that not all the data is yet on the graph. I made this graph around 10 days ago, and more data has come in since, and I will be updating it. There's a manuscript going on in the background, so this is, hopefully we have enough that the results won't change too much, but yeah, we're getting there. So you'll see that so on this graph I'm showing the diameter of the tree, and then it's the biomass estimated from the TLS on the y-axis. And you'll see there's an uncertainty there. That uncertainty comes because there's some inherent uncertainty in that volume reconstruction, and also because there's some uncertainty in the wood density. So for argument's sake, if we say we believe our TLS estimates, and we have put a lot of effort into getting them as good as we can, then we can compare that to how we would estimate the biomass from some of our allometric equations, and we can see how the two go. So here I've put on there the blue line from the equation that Charles Price presented yesterday. And what we see is that for the smaller trees, these two lines agree, but for the bigger trees, the Price equation would underestimate the biomass compared to the terrestrial light data. And that can make a huge difference. So these big trees, some of them store twice as much carbon as estimated from this allometry. And so if you just think about that in practical terms, if you have an area of mangrove, which is an old area of old-growth mangrove that you're thinking of protecting, the carbon stocks may be double or 80% higher than what you thought using the traditional allometry. So getting good measurements is really vital, but that really highlights the level of uncertainty we're dealing with here. The next thing I want to do is put the same data on this graph. So here, instead of just having diameter on the x-axis, I've got the wood density times the height times the diameter squared. So I have more information about each individual tree on the x-axis, and that allows me to have a better prediction of biomass. And you can see that the lines are much straighter, which is basically helps all the statistics. If we can make a linear fit, that makes our statistics much better and much more robust. And this is similar to the pan-tropical equation from et al., which I'm now showing in blue. So that equation uses those three predictors. And what we're finding is that our TLS estimates of biomass are not statistically different from the estimates we would get with this equation. So, so our conclusion would be that given the 130 or so TLS trees we have so far across these countries, this would support using this pan-tropical equation to estimate biomass, which I know is what some people already do, so that's good news. I have a big complicated table summarizing all these results. I won't go into the details. In some places, so in Panama and Jamaica, actually these equations are similarly accurate, but overall, across the full range of tree sizes, the Chavez equation comes out on top. Yeah, I won't go into any details on that. So I've got a few slides to finish looking at challenges and future research priorities. I don't know how much time I've got, but it should be okay. And the first challenge I want to mention is wood density. So what I've told you so far is assuming that all these trees have, for the same species, has the same wood density. And I've used the global average. And this is the black dot on this line. So for Avicennia, I use something just below 0.8 for the wood density. But we actually have collected some data in this project and shown that in Jamaica, these trees are much denser. So all else being equal, the trees in Jamaica would store more carbon. Of course, all else isn't equal because the trees in Jamaica tend to be shorter. And so there's an offsetting going on between these different conditions. So trees will be shorter in some areas and denser, and those two things may balance out to give a similar level of carbon storage. But we don't have that much data on wood density yet, and we haven't got good systematic sampling across landscapes, so we don't really know what's driving this. We just have these broad differences between countries, which I'm not sure whether or not this is good enough to really know what's going on. So I think this is a challenge, and I think we can make progress on this by collaborating with global databases out there. There's lots of databases which collate data on wood density, and once there's enough data in there, then we can look at these global trends and actual environmental drivers of this. So I would recommend, we are making all this data openly available, and we'll tell the people that run these databases, and I would recommend that wherever possible, we contribute to those. The second challenge, and this has been mentioned a lot, is soil carbon. And I don't have any solutions here, I'm afraid. I just wanted to highlight it because I think it's really important. I have this feeling that I'm focusing on the above ground carbon, and I'm trying to reduce the uncertainty. I'm kind of getting this uncertainty lower and lower and lower. But over here, there's a massive amount of carbon with a much bigger amount of uncertainty. So at a certain point, it becomes a bit futile to keep on reducing this one if you're not going to address this one. And yeah, that's a lot of hard work and a lot of soil sampling, and I don't know much about it. I just wanted to highlight it because I think it's really important here. So yeah, I've seen papers saying that 80% of the carbon can be in the soil, and that has far fewer measurements. And the final one is scaling up. So let's imagine we have this perfect allometric equation, and we can predict our plot carbon. We want to take that and scale up to make a national or regional mangrove carbon map. But there's lots of challenges with that as well. This is what Letitia was presenting yesterday, and also Lola was presenting something about this as well. And actually, I came over on Sunday from London. I woke up at 4 a.m. this morning because I'm on London time, and I spent a few hours looking at the data which Lola presented yesterday, and I made this graph. So this is the satellite-derived canopy height at 12-meter resolution all around the world for mangroves. And I just plotted on top of that all of the plot data I have from this project, from Colombia, Panama, and Suriname, and found a reasonably good correlation between the two. So quite cool that we can predict mangrove biomass with some accuracy just from satellite data. But as you can see, there's a huge amount of scatter in this graph. So if you have a mangrove which is 20 meters tall, a mangrove area, 20 meters tall, it might store 50 kilograms of biomass, it might store 150, according to this level of scatter. We can make this better. This is a single satellite product, and as Letitia was presenting, you can smooch together lots of different products in different ways and try and make it better. But it's not going to get, we're not going to get correlations here of 0.99 ever. We're always going to get something maybe up to 0.7, let's say. And this is a common practice, a common challenge across terrestrial forests. And so here, this is an annoying thing to say, but we always need bigger plots. I know I tend to sit behind my desk and look at this from a remote sensing point of view, but most of the plots here are approximately 10 by 10 meters. And satellite pixels, in this case, are 12 meters, often they're 30 meters. And so we don't know if your satellite pixel may fall on the edge of your plot. Also, you have a 10 by 10 meter plot and you take a GPS coordinate in the middle. GPS under forest has a resolution, has an uncertainty of plus or minus 5 meters. We don't know where this plot is exactly. So, as annoying as it is, I still think we need bigger plots. But one thing I think this project is doing really well is, and a really valuable contribution, is collecting airborne laser scanning data and making this openly available as well. So this can help, excellent. This can help bridge that divide between scales. So airborne laser scanning data provides really detailed 3D information across the landscape, and we can better situate our small plots and predict carbon and use it as a medium layer, a middle layer in between the plot data and the satellite data. And just to finish, one thing I've been thinking about is the kind of long-term sustainability of this MRV process. And I would say that there's lots of knowledge and really valuable activities going on in the terrestrial forest mapping world. So I also work for the GeoTrees project, which is just one example of this. It's a project which is set up to calibrate and validate satellite products from the European Space Agency and NASA. And so they have lots of plot data, lots of terrestrial LiDAR, lots of airborne LiDAR, all this kind of stuff, and huge amounts of work going on the methods. And I was actually at their meeting a couple of weeks ago, and the management were asking, does anyone have any data in mangroves? We would love to have some. We would love to have mangrove people involved. So I think there's a real opportunity to get involved. There's differences. But they also have valuable resources. So they have lots of training going on. They're running a training on this mapping exercise in Panama in a few weeks. They've got one coming up in China in the summer. They've got lots of resources and training. And I think tapping into these ongoing projects could really help sustain this in the long term. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, or if you want to talk to me about the allometry analysis, I know many of you here are involved in it, please come and approach me today or tomorrow. And thank you. Cheers. Let me turn this off.
Thank you, Toby, for your presentation. I'd also like to make a plug for GeoTrees. It is a vast network of resources and training, and he would have also highlighted not just challenges, but very possible solutions. Yes, some of these solutions can also be challenges in and of themselves, but it's things to look forward to, things to get excited. And so I'd like to just thank you for that as we broke down the fundamental bits of what allometric equations even are for the variety of users that we have here, but also getting into some data accuracy elements. So our next speaker zooms out of the regional and practical perspective, asking how does all of this come together into a harmonized MRV approach. Our speaker, Lozano Arias, holds a master's degree in environmental engineering and has over 5 years of experience in applied scientific research and technical consulting. She's a specialist in remote sensing and biophysical variable modeling with an emphasis on biomass estimation and blue carbon assessments in mangrove ecosystems. She has experience using machine learning algorithms and in land cover classification, as well as monitoring under the Korean land cover standard. She's participated in international projects focused on capacity building to strengthen blue carbon MRV systems in Latin American and Caribbean countries, as well as technical collaborations and publications with the IUCN, the IDB, and INVMA. We'd like to welcome Laura.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Laura. Please be patient with my English because I am in the process of learning English. So, okay, I'm going to present perspective on harmonizing a blue carbon MRV system. The content of my presentation first, the importance of Latin American and Caribbean mangroves. I'm gonna say some facts that usually we know. Second, need of harmonized MRV systems. I'm going to ask if harmonized system, MRV systems are really necessary or not. Then, regional collaboration through community of practices. I'm going to tell you a work that we have been developed with the community of practice in order to harmonize MRV systems. Then challenges that we identified in the process, and some priority actions and next steps. So first, why Latin American and the Caribbean mangroves are important? Why the region is important? First, because the region is a global hotspot. We host approximately 28% of the world's mangroves, and also has half of the 20 countries with the tallest mangrove forests in the world. Then, as you know, Vida Manglar, as a region, we have an early experience in blue carbon. Then I know that mangroves are more than carbon. They offer another ecosystem services as, for example, coastal protection, contribution to food security, and obviously they have a key role in climate mitigation. But also, the region is high diversity of political and ecological context, because we have mainland and island states, We are a bioceanic region bounded with the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean and the Caribbean Sea. And that not only changed the ecological context of mangroves, I mean different species and those things, that change how the countries grow and how the countries develop their economies, their policies. So we are in a diverse region that helps to know more things. And finally, not all countries in the Latin American and Caribbean region explicitly include mangroves in their NDCs. This is not, I not want to say that it's bad or good, it's only a fact that helps us to understand more things and be diverse. So in conclusion, the LIC region is globally relevant because it contributes significantly to the climate change mitigation, acts as a fundamental nature safeguard, and this is so important in a really vulnerable region, the vulnerability to the climate change, and offers a unique real-world context to assess if the international agreements are good or not too good. Yeah, so before saying if harmonized MRVs are really necessary, I want to introduce what are MRV systems. So MRV systems are mechanisms that support monitoring, reporting, and verification. Let me see. Reporting verification in the process. Can you hear me? Yeah. In gas emissions and mitigation actions in line with the UNFCCC agreements. MRV was introduced for the Kyoto Protocol only for developed countries. Then in the Bali Action Plan was introduced conceptually and established, but also for developing countries, and something happens in that moment. And then appeared the Paris agreements with the ETF. So for me, MRV and ETF are practically the same. The difference, so how can I understand that, is the MRV is the mechanisms and the ETF is where MRV exists for UNFCCC approaches. So why I tell all that information? Because as you can see, the MRV system was, at the initial stage, was thinking for be fragmented, because developed and developing countries has different ways to achieve their goals. And anyway, so if we can work in a fragmented way, why is harmonization necessary? And I want to highlight something, because in this moment I'm going to talk about mangrove MRV system. I will to focus on that. That is practically the same as MRV, but focus on mangroves. So why is harmonization necessary? I think that for international objective is not necessary, because, for example, Colombia can keep being in the market and in the voluntary market carbon, even if the region is not agree in which deep of the soil we have to measure the carbon. But I think that harmonization offers a clear advantages. So I'm going to say what kind of advantages the harmonization give us. First, the comparability, because, you know, if we, as Dr. Leticia said us yesterday, that, for example, for IA, it's really necessary the harmonization. So that led us to answer questions about regional ecological questions if we are harmonized. Then if we are harmonized, the verification process could be easier, so that it builds confidence in real impact and support adaptive management and conservation decisions. Other thing is the visibility is so different. Say a little island in the Caribbean is doing that thing, that say all the region is doing that thing and achieve that goals. So I think the visibility will increase. Another thing is the scalability, because, yeah, you know, we are a region and we can access to regional climate finance mechanisms. So then I'm going to present the community of practices that you have been hearing. A community of practice is a platform created under this project, the regional MRV project. And we are a group of experts who are exchanging information, methodologics, data. And I think this is a good group, and we have been having meetings and we have been training, for example, in the TLS approaches. In this week, we're going to be training in measure method. Yes. And I want to highlight something of this, a work that we have been doing. We did a survey in head of Nikia and Farra. The survey was developed and distributed among participant countries, which are Panama, Suriname, Jamaica, and Colombia. And the objectives of this survey was to collect standardized and comparable information of mangrove MRV, protocols and practices, and recollect information in 5 different thematic areas. Data availability, I mean, if countries has access to LIDAR information or has DEMS, the other ones are above ground, below ground biomass assessments, soil carbon assessment, and sustainability assessment, that we ask the funding mechanisms of each country, of each project, yeah, those things. I want to highlight that the case of studies don't represent comprehensive national MRV, because this information was collected, for example, in Colombia and in Suriname, was collected across institutionality, but, for example, in Panama and Jamaica, was collected across a project. So the information is not complete and not represent the whole MRV system in the nation. But what partners, what can see in the comparison of this information? First, we can see that the institutional anshoring plays a central role in determining the stability and scalability of mangrove ecosystems, rather than funding or policy alignment alone. Because all countries has mangroves in their NDC, all countries has laws to protect mangroves, all countries reported similar funding mechanisms, for example, as international support. Only Colombia reported a government budget. But not all countries have an institutionality, so institutionality is really important. Then the methodological variability across the countries, that not only for technical disagreement, is more for the development of their infrastructure, their capacities, the difference between countries. Another thing is the countries with more advanced MRV systems typically operate centralized national platforms. For example, in Suriname is COPI and Gonini, from Colombia is Sigma. Most countries reported difficulties in accessing high-resolution DEMS or LiDAR data. All have access to optical imagery, but not those kind of data. Another one to highlight is that Colombia is the only country that is being part of the voluntary carbon market. However, the revenues from blue carbon credits cover only a limited share or overall cost of the management plan, no more than 25%. So this indicates that carbon finance currently plays a complementary rather than a sustaining role for mangrove MRV system. So we have to start to think how to convert the co-benefits of mangroves in money, because as I said, mangroves are more than carbon. So in this work, we identify some strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and risks. I'm going to say first with the strengths. We have a community of practices who is really good. We have a pioneering experience with blue carbon credits in Vida Manglar. We have complementary expertise across countries. We are in different steps of development of MRV systems, so I think that is good. All countries have political will for climate action. Opportunities, leadership and negotiation capacity across the community of practices. The integration of blue carbon into national strategies can unlock access to long-term financing and the technology transfer and training. Some weaknesses could be fragmented and sectoral policy frameworks between countries, limited technical capacity and infrastructural capacity in each country, limited national baseline mangroves map. For that reason, in this project, we are doing that kind of maps. Safety and logistical challenge in conducting field work. I think that the EA and the remote sensing are good tools for that, not replace, but to help that. And some threats like sea level rise, erosion, and extreme events, competition in international climate finance, and reliance on short-term process-based funding. Yeah, and to finalize, I define 3 principal challenges that we have to overpass or overcome. First, the institutional fragmentation, the capacity gaps, and the limited technical comparability. And I propose some action in the short, medium, and long term. Okay, I'm going to start with institutional fragmentation. In the short term, we have to designate lead institution from blue carbon MRV system, for blue carbon, in each country. In the medium term, we have to involve communities as we are hearing, involve communities and subnational actors in MRV. And in the long term, we have to cross-sectoral MRV governments aligned with national climate, biodiversity, and land use frameworks. For the capacity gaps, first, we have to train local technical teams, and more than train, we have to institutionalize the learning, We have to support sustained peer-to-peer exchange between countries. I mean, we have to keep the COP alive, the community of practice alive. And in the long term, we have to sustain national technical teams and long-term monitoring systems. And for the limited technical comparability, we have to define core MRV variables. And we have to be consistent in the reporting on fluxes in greenhouse gases fluxes. For example, some countries reporting in forests, other countries reporting in wetlands in that moment. So I think that we have to be agreeing that part. In the medium term, we have to expand the set of measured variables. For example, include methane fluxes. And then, and I think that is a really important, is establish a regional data platform, enable countries to upload standardized field and spatial data beyond greenhouses fluxes, for example, as Global Mangrove Watch of a platform that the professor Priest told us about yesterday. And yeah, that is all. Thank you very much for your attention.
Muchísimas gracias, Laura, for your presentation. So building on those perspectives, our next presentation focuses on a challenge many institutions face: how to integrate new methodologies into systems that are already in place. I hope you all are realizing we've also have a trend with our presentations so far. They're all very solution-oriented. So we're challenging Hamish to see if he can also contribute to that. So Hamish Asmath is our next speaker. He is a GIS officer at the Institute of Marine Affairs. He is currently pursuing a PhD in geography at the University of West Indies, St. Augustine, Trinidad, where he's focusing on modeling the watershed hydrology and estuarine hydrodynamics of water and nutrient pollution flows. He has produced mangrove above ground carbon estimates for mangrove forests in Trinidad and Tobago and other mangrove forests in the Caribbean using airborne LiDAR and field measurements. And he is currently involved in terrestrial laser scanning of individual mangrove trees to determine the amount of carbon storage, which will then be used to develop improved allometric equations for the MRV project. Mangrove research currently being undertaken is also assessing mangrove soil carbon and net ecosystem exchange of carbon dioxide and methane for Trinidad and Tobago. Please welcome Mr. Hamish Asmath for his presentation.
Can you hold this?
Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. So we're here to talk about challenges and opportunities, and trying to focus more on the opportunities because a lot of challenges have been raised. So well, we're looking at technology and how technology has been used and applied across the region and some of the challenges and opportunities we've faced. So exactly what are some of the traditional methods first which we've been using and rolled out across the region? All these traditional methods are very well documented in the Coastal Blue Carbon Manual. They've been applied in all the countries that are involved in the MRV project, as well as pretty much every blue carbon project across the world, I imagine. This is currently being updated by Conservation International. There's a global partnership of people involved from countries in the developing world and developed in order to have a very well-balanced input. So, and Conservation International, importantly, has proposed that this manual be put online on their website, but it'll be updated. So when new technologies and new methods and approaches become available and published, it'll automatically be updated, because this manual was published in 2014, I believe. And so it's due for an update because there has been a lot of development in the last 12 years. And it'll be great to have a living document online that will be expanded over time. So we've talked a bit about this, various presenters, the traditional methods. When we want to establish plot level amounts of carbon, we have DBH tapes and the vertex hypsometers, and we measure DBH and tree height in plots across your mangrove forests. And you take tree cora in order to assess the wood density as well as the carbon percentage. As Toby talked a little bit about, the wood density has a major part to play. So, and I know we've talked quite a bit about allometric equations. We're just going to talk about it a little bit more in that this is a study from, it's kind of cut off on the bottom right on my screen, that was done in Mexico. And the Chav equation, which Toby had talked about, on the left-hand side is Avicennia germanus, which is black mangroves. On the right side is Rhizophora mangle, red mangroves, the one with the prop or stilt roots. The gray line on the left in the middle is the Chav equation, which Toby was talking about. And so you can see it falls right smack dab in the middle of the various allometric equations. Now, Mexico, when they were developing their mangrove carbon assessment for the carbon markets, they used the Climate Action Reserve, which is a competing verification standard to Vera, which we had a talk about yesterday. And for the Climate Action Reserve, they actually is required that they use a single allometric equation. Now, Mexico, similar to most countries around the world, has mangroves of different structure and dynamics because of different environmental conditions. And they actually have a number of allometric equations locally produced, and then there's others from the region, and these are some of them. But the standard requires you use one allometric equation. So they did. For black mangroves, they use the Smith and Wieland equation, which is the dashed blue line at the bottom here, which is actually, you could see the lowest amount of carbon, as Toby was talking about earlier. Which allometric equation you choose is going to give you a different result. Now, you can see that if they had used the Chav equation, they get a lot more carbon and effectively a lot more money potentially they could earn. For Rhizophora, they use the Day equation, which is the dashed red line, which is the highest of the various equations. So that's interesting. So they technically get a lot more potential earnings through their carbon quantification. And this demonstrates, as what Toby was talking about, there's so many different possibilities as to which ones you choose, and that influences what you get. So that's why it's important to make an educated, informed choice. And the dashed lines are important to note. Those are, the solid lines are where the trees were destructively harvested up to, while the dashed lines is the extrapolation. So you can see, for example, on this, on the black mangrove on the left, the dashed line, the solid line goes up to here. So that means they were able to cut down trees going up to approximately 47 centimeters in diameter. Anything above that is an extrapolation, and that increases your uncertainty. Now, policymakers and decision makers don't necessarily care that much about uncertainty, but as scientists, we do. We know that it needs to be quantified, and at your highest levels of carbon assessment, you have the highest levels of uncertainty because we have not cut down these trees or have enough terrestrial laser scanning conducted to assess their carbon. So we need to bear that in mind. So terrestrial laser scanning, as we've talked a little bit about yesterday and today, Dr. Price mentioned it, as well as Dr. Lola from yesterday. So Professor John Agard, who used to be the head of UWC, he actually acquired this instrument through the British High Commission in Trinidad and Tobago. They gave seed funding to purchase a BLK 360, and that was used to test the terrestrial laser scanning in Trinidad and Tobago, and subsequently was used in the MRV project. Now, just very briefly about terrestrial laser scanning. This is a point cloud. You've seen a few of them yesterday and today. This is from Nariva in Trinidad, and we're just going to focus in on this little red square here. This tree in the center here was our focus tree. Now, this is not a photo. This is actually the point cloud, colorized. And you can see these are some of the tallest mangroves we have in Trinidad. These were 25 meters tall. Doesn't compare to the 65-meter tall in Gabon, but we're getting there. But of interest is that these roots were 6 meters high. So it was quite attractive to measure the DBH up at that location. But fun too to climb up there. If anybody's good at climbing monkey bars, you're great for the gym. Great for mangroves. So this is just an example of the trunks and the canopy with the leaves. So what was done? You took the point cloud, which has no structure; it's just billions and billions of points, and then you separate it out into wood and into the leaves. And we're only really interested in the wood on the left-hand side at this point. And then, as Dr. Price mentioned yesterday, you run through TreeQSM, which is an open source MATLAB library. Important to note is that for the project, as well as for the sustainability of the project, open source software was preferred. That way, the individual countries aren't required to provide. There's no financing required for licenses in the future. And this is one of the publications that came out of it. And so other traditional methods is the soil coring. There is no real easy way to get around the soil cores because as opposed to above ground carbon where we could use satellites, LiDAR, to assess it, soil carbon, we unfortunately have to take many cores and assess it, unless Letitia could solve that problem for us with her AI models, but as she spoke about yesterday. So what do we do with all this data and information? So there's lots of people who have this information. Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute Smithsonian Institute, I say generally, has rolled out the Coastal Carbon Atlas. It's focused right now mostly on soil carbon. So there are a number of plots around the region. This is just for the Caribbean region. Sorry, not plots. There are a number of cores in plots. And so this data is publicly available. And currently, though, you cannot actually put up your plot data on Coastal Carbon Network. So Dr. Jorge Hoyos he's the lead researcher of the project that Julio talked about earlier in Panama. This data is also publicly available through the scientific data publication, where there's the soil cores as well as the plot data. So these are all the traditional methods. So drawing attention now to some of the new methods. This is the same image that Letitia presented yesterday on the left. This is the process flow for the AI approach. And on the right is just another publication using an AI methods for, machine learning. Now, if you'll notice that for Letitia's presentation, the AI model is here. You can see there are a lot of other things before and after, including cleaning. But if you look on the right-hand side also, the AI model is here. But before here, there's field here, and there's lots of field stuff here. All of this data information, which is the new technology and new methods and approaches, require on-the-ground data and information. The hard work, which a lot of the people are doing in here, we still need to keep doing it. You cannot train a model and develop a model without accurate ground data, as Letitia was talking about yesterday. It's helpful to have, as she mentioned, processes and data standardized so that it makes their job a lot easier. So in this case, we used, this is for Trinidad and Tobago, the Caroni Swamp, the largest mangrove extent in Trinidad and Tobago. When we assessed the carbon, we got about 859,000 tons and about 122 tons per hectare. But that is just stock of the above ground stock. What about the other side of things, which is the emissions, because mangroves are a source of carbon dioxide and methane. Now, if you tell a policymaker, they may not want to hear this because they know that we have this much carbon. We can leverage that to get carbon credits or maybe RED+. But you have to subtract the other side of the equation or the other part of the equation. What are your emissions? So what training that will be occurring on methane and carbon dioxide emissions using LICOR 7810. You can, and my colleague Yuheimy is actually going to be talking about next presentation. This is just as an intro. But we'll have this data and information, and what do you do with it? This information has like the gas fluxes. Also, you have other information that is the chamber sizes. All this information is being generated. It has to be put somewhere. There was a researcher from the Yale University who was just cold emailing through their networks to get this information and data from around the region in order to do an assessment. There's no data portal to put all this data and information. So this in and of itself is a challenge. We have something, the data portal for the plots. Data portal for the soil cores. We don't really have anything for the plots. We don't have really anything for this. If we want to be able to make this data and connect up everybody so we could do these larger regional assessments and help with technology solutions like AI, we need these portals, data portals, to serve up the information. Of course, after you've published it and gotten your due recognition, put it up here so that everybody else can use it. Another new method of technology, which has not yet been applied in the Caribbean for mangroves, is eddy flux towers. Basically, it's a tower, and there's a lot of sophisticated sensors at the top and it's able to measure the net ecosystem exchange of carbon dioxide and potentially methane. This is an example of the second eddy flux tower that's been constructed in mangroves, I believe. It's in the Sundarbans, and which is, I think, the largest mangrove extent. So it's pretty interesting that they're assessing it there. We had we had aspirations to try this in Trinidad and failed dismally, mostly because of logistics. So we've converted to a different approach and method. So, and again, where does this information go? So FluxNet was actually created around the end of 2025. Well, I mean, it's been around for a long time, but they're actually trying to create a data portal whereby most people around the world who are using this can upload their data and put that information there. I'm not certain if it's gone active yet because this was just in December 2025. But again, there's only 2 sites in mangroves that actually have that, eddy flux systems. So we've had a lot of challenges, but the opportunities have been great, and we've leveraged this. This is actually the training that was conducted in terrestrial laser scanning in in Colombia. And we have 3 people who are in this photo in the room today, which is great. And this involved a variety of agencies in the 4 different countries. And what was really cool is that they combined the science side of things and the policy side of things, combining people together, which is necessary and important to get the policymakers and decision makers to understand how this thing can work and how it would be addressed. Now, one would have expected that we would have gotten some, not resistance, but maybe not as agencies interested, but across the region, every single person and agency we contacted jumped at the opportunity, from INVIMA in Colombia, Smithsonian in Panama, SBB in Suriname, as well as Jamaica Forestry Department. Everybody just was really interested in it, partially maybe because they were getting a $30,000 US piece of equipment, but they also got the training, and they followed up and kept trying to do the work against some very tough conditions, particularly in Jamaica when a hurricane hit. So we actually encountered, I'd say, no institutional barriers to incorporating this information. Everybody was just very much involved in trying to get to use. Of course, we do have the challenges, and the biggest one is the resource and the capacity constraints. But this project has addressed some of that by providing equipment. People is often what's needed, and the project undertook a train-the-trainer kind of approach so that people in each country were trained and they can sustain it. So when we're doing these activities, it's important to think about sustainability and the completeness of the project. So with that, I'd like to thank you.
Is it on now? Okay, great. Thank you, Hamish, for your presentation, as well as for keeping with the general theme that we now have in this panel of solutions and opportunities. It's really important to, paint the way forward, even acknowledging that while we have these opportunities, there are also challenges that coexist. So we're moving on to our last speaker. I'm now welcoming Yuheimy Castillo of the University of Panama to present on carbon sources and sinks, methane measurements in mangroves. Ms. Castillo is a Panamanian biologist specializing in environmental biology. She has worked on processing mangrove soil samples, one of the opportunities that we highlighted in this panel, and measuring carbon dioxide and methane fluxes across Panama's Pacific and Caribbean coasts as part of the Blue Natural Heritage Project. Additionally, Yuheimy has collaborated with the Carbon Laboratory at the CIHH in Panama, monitoring sap flow in Avicennia bicolor trees. Currently, she serves as a consultant for the MRV project and volunteer for the NGO Jóvenes por el Mar y las Costas, which is a really cool NGO that focuses on youth in our coastal environments. Her goal is to specialize in marine coastal ecosystems and environmental data analysis. So let's all welcome Yuheimy, please.
Buenas. Perfecto. Buenas tardes a todos. La verdad, para mí es un gusto y un placer estar compartiendo con ustedes en esta conferencia de Carbono Azul y de Humedales del 2026. Y bueno, para una pregunta, ¿qué ustedes creen? ¿Los manglares son héroes o son villanos? ¿Qué ustedes dirían? Para mí son héroes, pero así como vemos en algunas películas que hay héroes que tienen características de villano, eso puede estar pasando con los manglares. En el día de hoy yo le voy a hablar acerca de los manglares como aquellos que son captadores, pero también que pueden llegar a ser emisores. Y vamos a ver un poco una introducción a lo que serían las mediciones de metano en este ecosistema. Se cambió la diapositiva. No sé si pueden.
Sorry, could I just ask the tech team, thank you, if everyone can just be patient with us for a minute while the tech team checks over his slides. There was a little bit of a font issue, so just so that it's easy for everybody to follow along, just ask him for a moment of your patience. Okay. Yuheimy had a suggestion. If you want to present via PDF, if you just want to export, it should work itself out with her original submission. I think earlier too, when you were asking your question, a lot of folks were still trying to put on their translator, and we only got like 2 responses in Spanish. If you want to just put back on your translation device, we can go over again and ask the question in the meantime. See if we get some more responses, a little more engagement. Is that okay? Okay.
Disculpa. Es en vivo el programa, es en vivo. Son cosas que pasan. Ok. Ahora sí, toma 2. Uno de los desafíos que enfrentamos actualmente es el cambio climático. El cambio climático se caracteriza por la variabilidad climática. Ejemplo, el aumento del nivel del mar, aumento de la temperatura, también cambios en las precipitaciones de diferentes países. Actualmente se conoce que este cambio climático ha sido inducido sobre todo por la actividad humana que cambió la composición de la atmósfera. La atmósfera se encuentran gases traza. 2 de estos gases traza que voy a mencionar aquí son gases de efecto invernadero, que tenemos el dióxido de carbono y el metano. El dióxido de carbono siendo el gas traza de efecto invernadero más relevante, pero el metano no se le queda atrás. El metano tiene 28 veces más potencial de calentamiento que el dióxido de carbono. Conociendo todos estos desafíos, se han tratado de buscar soluciones que enfrenten esa mitigación de los efectos y también para adaptarnos a esas consecuencias del cambio climático. Parte de esto son las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, que buscan conservar, también restaurar estos ecosistemas para aumentar esa capacidad de captura de carbono y también para reducir la emisión de esos gases de efecto invernadero. Y entre estos ecosistemas, ¿cuáles están? Están los ecosistemas marinos costeros como los manglares. En particular, los manglares tienen la capacidad de capturar hasta 4 veces más que otros ecosistemas forestales no costeros. ¿Dónde los manglares podemos encontrar ese carbono? Yo lo voy a dividir en solamente 2 reservorios. Esos reservorios serían lo que es la biomasa muerta y viva. Y también tenemos el carbono orgánico que se encuentra en el suelo. Ambos reservorios tienen lo que sería esa biomasa superficial, lo que nosotros podemos ver, hojas, tallos, pero también hay ese carbono orgánico que se encuentra en la materia subterránea, en el suelo, raíces. La parte bonita y que generalmente conocemos, pero los manglares también emiten gases de efecto invernadero. Hay que considerar que los manglares son ecosistemas y los ecosistemas son dinámicos, por ende siempre hay un movimiento de los elementos. ¿Dónde emiten entonces gases de efecto invernadero los manglares? Pueden derivar de muchas fuentes. Yo me voy a enfocar solamente en estos 2 gases, que es el dióxido de carbono y el metano. Esto puede venir desde el suelo, ya sea por la actividad de microorganismos que están descomponiendo la materia orgánica, la respiración de los otros seres vivos. Pero en particular, el suelo de manglar, al encontrarse inundado, da las condiciones propicias para que se dé un proceso conocido como metanogénesis, el cual me va a producir metano. Desde las plantas, pero de las plantas también como mediadoras, pero también pueden ellas mismas liberar. Por ejemplo, las plantas tienen el proceso de respiración, van a liberar dióxido de carbono directo a la atmósfera. Pero otro proceso que yo consideraría de las plantas importantes mencionar es la transpiración, en que las plantas pueden tomar ese dióxido de carbono y metano disuelto en el suelo y luego liberarlo a través de estructuras como lenticelas o estomas. Y por último, por parte de las plantas tenemos estas raíces aéreas que están adaptadas al manglar y los neumatóforos, que pueden realmente comportarse como conductores directos del metano que se produjo en el suelo y va directo a la atmósfera. Y no termina simplemente ahí, sino que en el manglar también hay microorganismos que se pueden encontrar dentro de la planta, bacterias metanogénicas, bacterias metanotróficas y hongos, que pueden influenciar estas emisiones, tanto la de dióxido de carbono como la de metano. Si bien nosotros nos estamos enfocando en lo que sería el metano, para mí no simplemente podía mencionar el metano, porque es como contar la historia media, y estos son procesos que se manejan en el manglar. Como esta última parte de la presentación, ¿por qué medir el metano en manglares? Hay 4 razones precisas. Va a traer un beneficio climático preciso, porque vas a estar cuantificando tanto lo que serían lo que secuestra el manglar, como también lo que sería lo que emite el manglar, y así considerar ese potencial de calentamiento del metano. Porque vas a generar datos fiables que te van a ayudar con las políticas internacionales al compartirle esta información y créditos de carbono que se basen en ciencia. También un entendimiento ecológico. Vas a entender qué factores, por ejemplo, tanto los ambientales, y ojo, estamos diciendo que el cambio climático está cambiando nuestros factores ambientales, entonces estamos en un tiempo crucial de medir esos factores, como también esos factores biológicos que van a impulsar tanto la producción como sería que se liberen ambos gases de efecto invernadero. Y también, por último, vamos a tener un presupuesto global que sea un poco más real, que los inventarios de gases de efecto invernadero sean más precisos, como también lo que sería considerar todos estos cambios de emisiones de los gases en lo que serían en los modelos predictivos de cambio climático. Esas serían mis 4 principales razones por qué medir metano. Básicamente, nos va a ayudar a entender lo que sería el rol de los manglares en la mitigación del cambio climático. Como segunda parte de la presentación, sería también ver cuál es lo que se ha cumplido durante el proyecto de MRV en Panamá y también cuáles son los siguientes pasos. tenemos lo que sería la limpieza de datos LIDA. Para que se diera el proceso, gracias a miembros que tomaron del anterior proyecto, Audubon Américas, nos dio la posibilidad de utilizar datos de rizófora mangle que se habían capturado antes, pero estos datos necesitaban ser procesados. Solamente se encontraban en datos crudos que fueron procesados alrededor de más de 20 árboles que eran provenientes de rizófora mangle. También se dio la colecta de nueva data, sobre todo las especies que sería Avicennia germinas y Avicennia agricolor, para que se tuviera también data de estas especies que hacían falta. Dentro de lo último que hemos realizado, o en realidad lo más reciente que hemos realizado, fue el entrenamiento que se dio en Surinam. Específicamente se dio entrenamiento en Silus, donde se probó el equipo, donde se entrenó a nuevas capacidades de este país. Y también se realizó una gira de campo para tomar colecta de datos de metano. Esto utilizando el ICOR 7810 y también utilizando la cámara inteligente. Pero hubo un gran reto. Un gran reto que en ese momento dificultó la toma de data. Pero esto también me dejó mucha enseñanza. La principal limitante fue el clima de Surinam. Ay, 5 minutos. Fue lo que sería la lluvia. Y si bien en Panamá se había dado la toma de datos en ambas estaciones, la enseñanza fue que cada país y cada equipo tiene un gran reto, adaptarse a las características de su país. Y que si bien en la capacitación, los expertos de cada país van a tener que asumir este reto, a escoger los lugares correctos. Dentro de los siguientes pasos es la selección de los sitios. También hay que ver la viabilidad que tiene esto en el tiempo para que se puedan mantener las mediciones de metano tanto del suelo. Vamos a probar también el experimento de medir metano en los árboles, que ambas partes lleguen al acuerdo, que se cree nueva capacidad. Ya pasó el entrenamiento en Surinam y en los 3 días que vienen estaré compartiendo con ustedes para que ustedes cuando salga el viernes ya estén con toda la confianza para medir emisiones de metano en sus diferentes países. Y también vamos a compartir lo que sería el reporte y verificación de estos datos de manera continua. Sin antes darle lo que serían los agradecimientos. Tanto para manejar la data, colectar nuevos datos, fue esencial muchas personas que mostraron su disponibilidad en algún momento que se requirió apoyo del equipo, permiso, como aquellas personas que estuvieron trabajando detrás de la computadora, limpiando datos LIDAR, como aquellas que nos acompañaron a campo. Y si bien aquí está una parte, son muchos más. Y muchas gracias. Okay.
Muchísimas gracias. Thank you to all our speakers. We are now going to open the floor to audience questions. So just a reminder, you could submit your questions through the Q&A tab on the conference virtual stage for those of you online and those of you in the room. So if there are not any questions, I will ask my own, but I'm going to give you a chance first. Yeah, you can go ahead and ask. Is there a roving mic? 1 second, please. And I'm just going to ask, you say your name, you ask the question, you say who it's directed to, and you can go ahead after that. Look the microphone. Thank you. Oh, not clear. I already know who you are. Go ahead.
From Jamaica. Question is directed to Yuheimy.
Is your mic working? Yeah? Okay. You
Yeah.
can sit. Yeah.
I know you mentioned, I'm going to go slow because of the translation. I know you mentioned rainfall as a challenge. However, you also indicated that when inundation inundation was there in the mangrove area, methane would be released. So I was wondering if you got the opportunity.
Okay, I think they're trying.
Hello? Hello? Okay. If you got the opportunity to measure when there was either inundation or rainfall in the mangrove versus when there was none, to see if the rate of release of methane was different. I was just curious.
Okay. Perfecto. Bueno, nosotros medimos en condiciones realmente amigables. Nosotros realizamos mediciones de metano sin la presencia de algún fenómeno. Y esto es importante porque si se quiere contribuir como mediciones y se haga el balance, generalmente se está priorizando lo que son manglares pristinos. Más bien, yo diría que sería interesante empezar a realizar las mediciones, como fue el caso de Panamá, cuando hay algún fenómeno, por ejemplo, si se quema 1 hectárea de manglares, medir esas emisiones en ese momento o cuando ocurra alguna inundación. Pero estos datos serían importantes para entonces hacer la comparación de las emisiones cuando hay algún tipo de perturbación a cuando se encuentran pristinos o mayormente conservados. No realizamos mediciones en este tipo de circunstancias, más decir por los cuidados del equipo y también porque no era lo que estábamos buscando. En ese momento se estaba buscando ver estas emisiones pero para el balance del carbono en el manglar.
All right. Thank you, Keith. Any other questions? Yeah? Okay, we'll just get the mic to you. Give it a second. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you. Nepal from Sudan. I'm interested in carbon sequestration. As you have seen, we have planted mangroves. I want to know how you measure the rate increase of carbon from juveniles up to when it is grown up. How will you do that? Because that is important to demonstrate the sequestration and how much additional carbon has been sequestered. Thank you.
Who would like to take that one?
Mm-hmm. I'm happy to jump in first.
Sure.
I would say that for juveniles, it should be much more straightforward to measure the carbon. We have many more samples of them, and so most of the allometric equations we apply would agree with each other. And so, I think that just a standard allometric equation, the ones by Charles Price or the ones by Jerome Schrav, any of those, or probably the local ones as well, would get the juveniles correct. And so it's really about counting the numbers and over how they're growing in different areas, measure how tall they get, say, and using that as a baseline. Once they get bigger, it gets more difficult.
Yeah, okay. I think that answers it. Any other questions? Or how are we doing for time? Do we have time for other questions? We have 5 minutes. Okay. All right, I'll ask a question if you're a bit shy. Is there anything in particular that any of the speakers, so open to any of you, that you'd like to share, something you might be excited about, something that has far-reaching potential that you did not get to share on and that nobody asked you anything about?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think Michelle is going to take this one.
Thanks. So because we work in industry, oftentimes the processes and products tend to move a bit faster than, let's say, academia. So there's a couple of products that we already have existing. As I mentioned, we're using embedded systems to develop biomass, and this is a global biomass product, and it's performing much better than even what's currently existing. So a lot of even the planet data, which is, you have 3-meter, 30-meter resolutions. And then one of the things I'll be working on with my team within the next 6 months is to develop another sort of model using, of course, satellite data as well, to measure soil organic carbon. And we're actually taking this method and some of the things that I worked on in Canada that we're learning from mining companies, because they have used SAR. And SAR is like radar data. It just measures up to 1 to 2 meters as most. But what they've done in the mining companies, they've actually used these Bayesian sort of statistics model to actually ensure that you're getting much deeper information, so up to 20, 30 meters. And so we're collecting data globally to do this as verification, because as I think Hamish mentioned, the best models that we have, oftentimes we have to ensure that there's verification processes there. So we're ensuring that we have biomass above ground as well as below ground, and we'll see how they work. And there's a group currently, I think it's called Perennial, they're in the US. They've already have some soil organic carbon data available. They've quite extensive measurements within the US itself, so they're a good platform if anybody wants to look at in terms of methodology. We've also done a lot of methane work, especially in Vietnam and Indonesia, and the measurements there within, these were rice fields, but then they're applicable to, the method is very applicable to anywhere, really. And now that there's methane stat data, it's quite, I mean, the resolution is quite big there, but then you can sort of downgrade it to, or upgrade it, I guess, to the resolution that you tend to want. So that's just a couple of the things we're doing.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm sorry, I'm really poor at reading lips. If there's any other contributions from the panel, I do have other questions I can also
Can I jump in? I have a question for Yuheimy and Hamish.
Go for it.
About the methane. How much would it cost to actually get a good estimate of whether these systems are sources or sinks of methane, and when, at which season, either using your method, Yuheimy, using the actual chambers, or Hamish's preferred one of getting an actual tower? How much money are we talking for these? Which one's cheaper?
She didn't get the translation.
Oh, we didn't get the translation. Okay.
But I could answer a bit of it.
All right. Wait,
It's-
sorry, Hamish. Before you go, could you just say the question again? We'll try to get a translation this time so that
Yeah.
Yuheimy could think about her answer
Absolutely.
before you answer. Thank you.
I was asking about money for methane measurements. How much?
Cost.
Yeah. How much would it cost to get an accurate measurement of the methane fluxes from these systems from lots of trees across many years to actually work out whether they are sources or sinks of methane?
Yo creo que entendí bien. How much? La verdad es que este sería un proceso bastante largo. Se tendría que repetir mediciones a lo largo de ambas costas. En el caso de Panamá son 2 costas, pero en el caso de países debería repetirse donde tengan manglar a lo que sería alrededor de su país, y también considerando cuántas hectáreas de manglar tiene cada país. Es un proceso de tomar diferentes sitios representativos y posiblemente repetir esto no simplemente en una estación, sino en diferentes estaciones. Y el costo va a ser costo desde la parte humana de la capacitación, también como que se brinde el equipo a cada una de las naciones, y también costos representativos del trabajo de campo, y también publicaciones, invertir en aquellos investigadores que están capacitados e informados en este método.
Okay. I have one question online and one question in the room, but we also got the 1 minute notification. So is it, I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. Is your question a short question? The question online is not. But is your question a short question?
You saw the length of the presentations?
Correct. Okay, so we'll take her question as a short. I will allow persons to start the break if they'd like, and we'll answer the question online for those who are curious. So you can go ahead.
Hi, my name is Anaite Mills. I'm a climate change solutions specialist at the IDB for Suriname. The short question is, Suriname has a forestry MRV in place, or quite advanced. There are colleagues here in Suriname who are well more knowledgeable in that than me. What is the argument to create an MRV for mangroves, or a dedicated MRV for mangroves? What could be the argument? You could say that an MRV for forestry is already covering to a certain extent mangroves. So could you help me understand that argument at a policy level? And I have a second question. It's short as well, just for thinking. I'm not in the space that you guys operate on science. I'm more on the policy side, and as I hear you all present very advanced work, I'm wondering the climate justice aspect of this. Where do we stop? Like, what's the standard that we're looking for in terms of developing countries that do not contribute substantially to the issue of climate change, generating the level of data that you're generating? And what's the standard? What's the goal? And where do we stop versus developed countries that should be generating also the other part of the data? I'm wondering what are your thinking, what's your thinking on the climate justice front? And that's more philosophical, but let's see. Thank you.
Who would like to take the first part of the question? And then we'll get to climate justice.
Go for it.
Yeah.
Bueno, voy a responder la primera pregunta, pero en español. ¿Bien?
Yeah, that's fine.
Digamos, en la presentación, cuando me enfoqué en sistemas MRV de manglares, no quise decir que se creara un nuevo sistema solo para manglares, sino como explicar que lo que estaba hablando estaba enfocado solamente en los manglares, porque los sistemas MRV tienen otras secciones, como, bueno, en este momento se me olvidó el nombre de las otras secciones, de energía, bueno, etcétera. Pero me estaba enfocando solamente como en la sección de manglares, pero no creo que sea necesario un solo sistema para manglares. Creo que al contrario debe estar bien manejado y unido a todos los sistemas. Creo que esa es la razón, no hacer algo aparte, sino ese algo aparte que funcione bien y que se una bien a todo lo demás.
Yeah, okay. And climate justice.
Esa es la pregunta.
I like how they're all pointing to me. They kind of voluntold, didn't you? I think with climate justice, because the MRV system or even the process to get to carbon credit does entail people. So last week I was in the field, we're actually designing FPIC protocols for a lot of indigenous communities, so that takes a lot. And you do need specialists who are familiar with community settings. Not everyone can sort of step into this role. And we've been discussing that with Priya as well, giving her knowledge. And so when it comes to climate justice, we don't have to talk about the damages that currently exist. Climate change is real, it's happening, it's existing, we're facing it every day, and the decisions are already being made on the ground. And with the wealth of information that currently exists, unfortunately, we're not even tapping into as much as the IBCWC reports right now. So I think was early January, several weeks, there was a sort of meeting between the Caribbean as well as the Pacific to ensure that climate scientists are actually participating in some of these discussions and even report writing, because then when our information does get acknowledged, then there's huge opportunity for us to actually get the money. Oftentimes, we're dealing with governments having to generate adaptation programs or trying to get funding through either development banks or even multilateral, bilateral agreements. And this, there's conditions that are often set when you have these sort of agreements. It also ensures that, because almost every country does have a constitution, in that constitution does give rights to people. And within every constitution, it's also attached to the UN DRIP, for instance. There's FPIC protocol. It doesn't apply only to indigenous and local communities. It applies to everyone. And once you kind of follow these protocol, it means that every voice does get heard. And this is where the justice and rights comes in. But I often say with rights comes responsibilities. And when our voices are heard, especially local people, it gets passed on through different layers until it reaches the top. I mean, there's lots of organizations that are part of the IPCC sort of documentations, but even the UN FCC, like I was there for the 2015 Paris Agreement. We actually helped sort of maneuver REDD+ into that we advocated for that with the rainforest programs and all the persons sitting at that table in order to do that. And I think that's important because it highlights very importantly how advocacy is important and recognition of especially developing countries and even small island states here.
Thank you, Michelle. And thanks for that question. I am going to wrap up the session. During the break, I will ask the participants of the panel just to stay on to answer the online question, but everyone else can go ahead and start the break. So yeah, just wanted to say thank you and ask you to also join me in thanking the panelists for this session. So we'll now take a break before the last session of the conference. We will be reconvening at, how long is the break? 3:15? Okay, at 3:15. Thank you. And thank you to the support team. So the last question, y'all can go ahead, I'm just gonna continue talking. The last question that we got from online, can models be used for projection of biomass and hence carbon dioxide from new sequestration? I believe that's supposed to be 4 new projects to restore or grow mangrove. And then how is such a projection done? It's pretty loaded.
So I would say with a lot of uncertainty. So essentially, if you have a new area where you want to...
you can go ahead.
If you have a new area where you want to predict how much carbon is stored each year, you want to measure every few years, come back and measure how much carbon is stored. That gives you some estimate of how much carbon you're sequestering. If you you have to essentially you would use a satellite product or an airborne LiDAR product maybe to measure something about the forest, its height, the color of it from the satellites, and then use a model built off other forests to project to that region. And those models work, but they have lots of uncertainty associated with them, both in how the underlying plot data is treated and then how that model is built. So they exist and they work, but they only work at big enough scales where you have enough area to average out the errors.
Yeah, anybody else want to add to that? No? Okay, thank you guys. The rest of you can also go for your break now. We're going to wrap up. Thank you.